Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in this great world of ours. My name is Mitch Taco Bell. I'm your host for Tall Tales with Taco. It is Tuesday evening, and if you can't tell, I am super excited. Tonight is pretty awesome from an aviator's point of view. Now, my mom will probably find it boring and click off. But for all of you folks out there that are aviation enthusiasts, military, fighter pilots, anything to do with aviation, you need to watch this show. Feel free to share it, like it, subscribe, make a comment if you want. But tonight I've got Lieutenant Colonel Ted Drake. Ted Drake is a former MiG pilot, MiG-21. And I got to tell you how cool this is. He is the highest sortie flying pilot the Air Force has in the MiG. And what you don't get is that this secret program was so secret that it was probably only released a few years ago. I will ask Ted, um, but it's just one of those things that very few people got to actually see a MiG up close. And when they did, it was kind of like Top Gun, where he goes, "Holy shit, MiG-28! No one's been this close before." Well, in combat or in training, when they go head to head with a MiG, next thing you know, that initial shock uh, would throw them out of their loop, and that's the uh, for the 4477th job to break the ice and fix that. So, without further ado, I'd like to bring Ted on. Ted, how are you, sir?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having me this evening.
Are you kidding? As you can tell, I'm kind of excited because this is just something that you never heard about. And I was talking to my uncle who was a F-14 Rio years ago, and I'm telling him about, hey, you're going to be on the show. He goes, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember those guys. We went out there and they had the YF-17 and the YF whatever and all these test airplanes. And I guess the guy in the F-16 took off and pulled up too hard and dragged the tail feathers um, on his jet and had to come back and land or something like that. But this is in 73, 74. So I'm like, well, you never told me about this stuff." And he goes, "Yeah, I guess I didn't. Yeah, it was kind of secret back then. I don't even know why I mentioned it." Hey, I'm going to turn you in, Bruce McCampbell, you're going to jail. You broke the law. Well, so when did this program, Constant, which evolved into Constant Peg, when did this actually get declassified that we could and we're enabled to talk about it?
Yeah. Before I start, I'd like to correct just a few things you said on the introduction.
Yeah, sure.
I did fly MiG-21s. I also flew MiG-23s. I'm the highest time MiG-23 guy, but not the highest time MiG-21 guy or the highest time overall. I'm like about the fifth or sixth or seventh overall for number of sorties, but that's where I was primarily a MiG-23 guy.
MiG-23. I got that wrong. I
Yeah.
apologize, folks, because I know
Um,
I wrote it down, you had 294 sorties in
yeah.
that airplane. And it mentioned in the book, if you guys haven't read this book, Red Eagles, highly recommend it. How the program evolved and came about. Fascinating stories in there of every single player from the inception all the way to the end. But I thought there was a picture that said you were the highest time. It was MiG-23
Yeah.
sorties then, right?
Yeah. We didn't keep track of hours very much. We just kept track of sorties.
Oh, that is so cool. So how many hours do you think you have in MiGs in
Um,
general?
because of our sorties and the way we ran them, and our working areas were just like right beside of our airfield. So, like in a MiG-21, we'd do an afterburner takeoff, climb to low key, tactical intercept, 2 to 3 BFM engagements, a simulated flame out low approach, and a close full stop in 24 minutes. And
Whoa.
in the MiG-23, it had a little bit more gas, so its average sortie duration was probably between 30 and 35 minutes, probably around 35 minutes.
And I,
So I don't know, my 471 sorties probably come out to, I don't know, 250 hours or something like that. But they were really action packed hours. There was no time spent cruising to or from the area. I mean,
right.
as soon as you took off, you were in the area and you were on GCI's freak and you were ready to go.
So this map I have, top secret Area 51 blacked out. Where would you guys be, over like R76 or somewhere?
In the upper left-hand corner of that, you see R71,
Mm-hmm.
and then beside of it, there's a couple ranges. There's EW East, EW West, and then a thing that's got a little airfield marking in it. And that's where we were, which was Tonopah Test Range Airfield. So we took off from there, and our primary working areas were range 71 and 76. So the people we were flying against typically came in from the south into the southern portion of range 76. We entered from the northern portion of range 71, and the intercept and the fight was on.
Wow. That's incredible. And to show people what you were flying, let's see, that's I'll get this straight. Mig-21, right?
Yeah, MiG-21. We had in our squadron building, which was in a hangar up there. It was kind of a bare bones operation. We had a display hangar because we had a lot of VIPs that would come up. Mm-hmm. Anywhere from one time we had the Vice President of the United States when George H.W. Bush was Vice President. We had a number of chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a lot of general officers. And so in this display hangar, we had that big American flag, and we had a MiG-21 and a MiG-23 in there. So we could take them in there. Typically, we had a hard stand beside of them, so they could go up the hard stand, look in the cockpit, and we had a MiG-21 guy and a MiG-23 guy there to give them a briefing on the airplane and answer any questions they had on it.
That's fascinating. And this whole thing started in the late 70s with some MiG-15 and a MiG-17 that the Israelis had gotten for us, right?
Officially, I don't know where the planes came from. I'm not aware in our program that we had a MiG-15. And by the time I got to the program in '84, the two MiG-17s were grounded and they were gone. But yeah, the squadron had, and they flew in training, the MiG-17, MiG-21, and MiG-23.
And what was your favorite out of all of those?
Oh, the MiG-21.
Really?
It was a really fun little sports car to fly.
And that's an amazing looking airplane. Let's see, which one's this? This is the 23 Foxbat.
That's the MiG-23, yeah.
And was the call sign Foxbat? Am I getting that right?
No.
No, that was MiG-25, wasn't it?
Yeah, MiG-23 is Flogger. MiG-21 is Fishbed.
Golly, C-130 guy, we never had to worry about identification unless you're getting shot at. But here, all right, here's a picture of you in RID 49.
Yeah, actually, that's not me. That's a guy named Rob Zettel. And Rob and I have talked about this. We both have no clue what he's doing with a set of crew chief headphones on. And somehow I asked him how he got that picture, because we didn't take many pictures up there. I mean, every gate you drove through or taxied through, every door you walked through, and about every 200 feet on the fencing all around the base were these signs. And they said, restricted area, authorized personnel only, photography prohibited, use of deadly force authorized. And we did not want to give those young 2 and 3 stripers a reason to shoot us.
Yeah.
So there were just no cameras. I never took a camera up there, never even thought about it. Of course, we never had cell phones in those days. But right. Z-Man apparently, I don't know if Intel took the picture and he got a hold of it or something. He said, well, I found it in my stuff years later. Well, if I'd have known how this was going to work out, I would have taken one too. But that is my airplane there.
Yeah, the book gives the impression that was you, because it's Major Thomas Drake's MiG-23 MS Flogger E RID 49 serial number 20. When he left the unit, he remarked that the MiG-23 had tried to kill him on every sortie.
I never said that. I flew the airplane 294 times, and it only tried to kill me 4 times. But that's a pretty high rate compared to every other airplane I flew. The F-16 never tried to kill me. The F-4 only tried to kill me maybe once, and that was my fault. But what I did say was, I told guys that I checked out in the plane as they were coming through the training. Every time I put my foot on the ladder, I just said to myself, Ted, This airplane will kill you today if you let it. And that was my admonition to myself, to be careful with it, because it was unforgiving. You know what? One of the things we used to say was it was departure prone and recovery resistant. So as opposed to the MiG-21, which was hard to put out of control, almost impossible to spin, and very easy to recover, the MiG-23 was the opposite. It gave little warning when it departed control flight. Didn't do it often, but when it did, it gave little warning. And when it departed, it almost always spun. And it depended a lot on what your fuel load was, which determined the center of gravity to a big extent, whether it was going to come out of that or not.
Well, didn't they have in the manuals that if you got into a spin in the 23, you were to eject?
No. The manuals. We didn't have many manuals.
Right.
You know, let me take you back to like MiG-21 training. I got in the squadron, and you've got a couple weeks to do nothing while your security clearance is upgraded and you got authorization to go to this base. Because when I got there, obviously the 4477th had the MiGs, and the F-117s were down the street with their stuff. So you didn't just come up to the front gate and walk in. You didn't just get into an airplane, fly in. You had to have a badge authorized to you before you ever showed up.
Right.
So then towards the end of that, when your badge is coming up, to check out in the MiG-21, for example, there was typically it's about a 2-week process. And I remember I sat down at the desk. My IP in the MiG-21 is Paco Geisler. I sat down at a regular Air Force steel desk, and there was 3 chairs. One chair we put on the right side of me, one chair was on the left side of me, and one chair was right up in front of me. And there were 3 pictures that were mounted on cardboard. It was maybe 12 by 18. One picture was of the left sidewall of the MiG-21, and it went there. The other was of the center, and it went there. And the other was of the right, and it went there. That's a MiG-23 cockpit. And that was my simulator. And
Wow.
we just started going through some systems. Go through the engine, go through the hydraulics, go through the pneumatics, go through the fuel, go through the flight controls, go through some of the switches. And we did that. You had academics basically for 7 days. So
Right.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday the first week, Monday and Tuesday the second week. Again, no simulators, no 2-seaters. So on Wednesday of the second week, you went out and did an engine start. Your IP was going to go fly a BFM mission against somebody, basic fighter maneuvering. Mm-hmm. So you went out a couple minutes early, and you went into the cockpit. We never did a walk around in the MiG-21s. Crew chiefs basically owned the airplane. If they hadn't found something that was wrong, you weren't going to find it. And if they found something that was wrong, they weren't going to give you the airplane. So you just went out and you got in the cockpit, and you went through the switches and stuff for the engine start, which was pretty basic. 2 and 8. 2 was the battery put in on. 8 was the oil pressure gauge. You kind of needed that. 1 and 3 were the number 1 and 3 fuel pumps. And then there were some switches on the left that you just gang loaded all of them on, and you hit the start button. We had 2 of these big trucks, which were nothing but battery trucks. And they had license plates on them, and one was named Ivan, and the other was named Natasha. Don't ask me why it wasn't Boris and Natasha, but it wasn't. And so that engaged the starter generator and started. And you started the engine, and then you shut it down and got out, and your IP got in it, started it up, went out, flew his mission, came back. On Thursday the second week, you did what we called a slow taxi. So you went out, you had your own airplane this time, and you started it up. You've done that once before, so that's not brand new to you. Crew chief typically was on a hard stand right beside of you because the intake was way out in front. And when you got the engine started and everything, and nothing caught fire, and crew chief was okay with it, you dropped the canopy. And the canopy sometimes lined up and sometimes they didn't. And sometimes the crew chief had to get up on top of it, kind of rock it back and forth to get it to where the pins would go in. And then they pulled the hard stand. And now one of the hard parts about flying the early model MiG-21s came, because they didn't have nose gear steering. It was totally differential braking. So you had to get enough power up on that thing to get it moving fast enough that you could bring the throttle to idle and make a 90-degree turn before you had to power up again. Because if you had to power up halfway through the turn, you blew the crew chiefs and all their equipment over, which was in a line beside of you. So that was tough. And if it didn't work, you know, rather than power up, the crew chief would give you the thing, and he'd come straighten out your nose gear, and all the other crew chiefs would go run and hide, and then you'd try it again. You finally got it out, and you're using differential braking till you got out on this long parallel taxiway.
But don't you have braking on your stick or something weird?
Well, the brakes were on the stick, and that seemed weird for about 3 minutes. After that, it didn't seem like a problem at all. So anyway, you had the brakes on there, and so when you pushed on the left rudder pedal, what it did was it relieved the brake pressure on the right side so that you'd turn left. And then the same thing, when you pushed on the right rudder pedal, it relieved the brake pressure on the left side so you'd turn right. Call sign on these things was Zigzag 01, because that's how you kind of got it till you got it out on the taxiway. And typically on those things, you always had a fire truck about 500 feet in trail with you. He was just waiting for something to go wrong. Never did, but they liked getting out and doing stuff too. So then we'd get it out on the parallel taxiway, which was about 2 miles long. And one of the things about the MiG-21 was the brakes were pneumatic. Now, the F4 had things that ran off pneumatics too, but the F4 had a pneumatic pump. So if you used pneumatic pressure, it pumped your system back up to what it should be. MiG-21s didn't have that. You got a certain amount of pressure in that MiG-21, and I think it was like 105 kumquats, a kumquat being a kilogram per square centimeter, because they were metric. And if that was used up when you came back to land, you had no brakes.
Really? It didn't.
So you ended up watching your air in that thing almost as closely as you watched your gas. And you get it out on the parallel taxiway, and you'd push the power up and get it up about 60 to 70 knots, because that way you could steer it with the rudder and you didn't have to use any of the brakes. Right. And then when you got down to about 1,000 feet remaining, you'd slow it back down and use the brakes to get it into the arming area. And the arming guys would check you out. And then you'd go out on the taxiway and you just taxi it down the runway again. This was your slow taxi, and at about 70 knots or something, you got to the departure end. And then you went through de-arm, and then you tried to get it back in the chocks again. Same thing, getting it back in the chocks was about as hard as getting it out. So then on Friday of the second week, you did what we called the fast taxi. So you went out to start the engine. You've done that twice before, so you're starting to get fairly good at it. You're taxiing out. You've done that once before, so that's not totally new. But this time you take it out on the runway, you line it up, you run the engine up, release the brakes, take it, put it into burner, take it up to about 135 knots, and then you abort it. Throttle idle, put out the drag chute, which was just a little button up here. It's hard for me to get my fingers on the screen. And you hit that, the chute blossomed, and you went down to de-arm, and you dropped it off and went back to the chocks.
Right.
So that was 2 weeks. So then on Tuesday of the second week, Monday the second week, we didn't fly. We can go into that later. Tuesday the second week was your TR1, Transition 1 ride. So you go up to your airplane. And this time your IP is going to be in a T-38. So you go out to your airplane, you start the engine. You've done that 3 times before. You taxi it to the end of the runway. You've done that twice before. You take it out on the runway, and general officers and stuff, when they'd hear about that thing in the fast taxi where we'd take it up to 135 knots and then abort it, they'd always say, "Why are you teaching guys to do an emergency procedure like that?" General, we're not. What we're doing is we're combining 2 of the more critical phases of flight into one. We're letting him experience the takeoff roll, and then we're letting him experience the after landing portion before he actually flies. And then on the flight, you're out on the runway, you run it up, you've done that before, you release the brakes, you light the burner, you get it stabilized so the rudder becomes effective, you've done that before, you take it to 135 knots, you've done all that before, but now you just come back on the stick, you bring the nose up to 10 to 12 degrees. When it's flying, you bring the gear up. A little bit later, you bring the flaps up. A little bit something different on Soviet planes. When the gear's up and locked, you take the gear handle and move it back to the off position, sort of like Boeing planes.
Yeah.
And then you flew. The IP in the T-38, this was what we all like to do, was fun. He took off before you and pulled closed traffic. And when he was on downwind, he basically sort of had control of the field. He'd clear you for takeoff. And you do the takeoff on his call. And as you're taking off, he's coming around the final turn behind you. And then he catches you just about the time you break ground, and he climbs out with you. and
Oh,
he can
wow.
check gear retraction. He can check the flaps, make sure there's nothing leaking, that the gear's all up and locked and everything. And then you go out and you do sort of the same types of things that you do on a lot of TR1s, a lot of acro and things like that. Then you come back for a simulated flame out low approach, couple touch and goes and a full stop. And then you progressed from there. But that was our checkout program, sort of in the MiG-21.
But by this time in your career, let me look. By this time, you had already been an instructor pilot in the F4, an F-16 instructor pilot in the Philippines, in England. I mean, you've got a lot of instructor time.
Everybody did. To get to
But I mean,
even,
it was easier. It came faster to you, I would say.
yeah. But
If it's
like
a
I
very
said,
fast program.
this was a pretty heavy squadron on talent. To even apply to the unit, you had to be either on the Air Force. It was a tri-service squadron, first of all. So there were 14 Air Force, 3 Navy, and 1 Marine permanently assigned. The Air Force got roughly 70% of the sorties. The Navy and Marine Corps got the other 30. Air Force paid 70% of the cost. Navy and Marine Corps paid the other 30. To even apply as an Air Force guy, you had to be either a weapons school graduate or an aggressor and have a minimum of 1,500 hours of fighter time, which was about 7.5 years of fighter time back then.
Gotcha.
And on the Navy side, we had 2 Top Gun instructors out of Miramar. We had an East Coast aggressor out of Oceana. And our Marine guy was out of Yuma. He was one of the MOTS guys, Marine Air Weapons Tactics School instructor. So, I mean, typically of our 18 guys we had, you'd only have maybe 4 captains or Navy lieutenant equivalents. And everybody else was a major or lieutenant commander, except for the squadron commander, who was a lieutenant colonel.
Was that Bucko? Was the Marine Bucko?
Lenny Bucko was the first Marine. George Tullis, Cajun, was the second Marine. And Marty Macy, Fogg, was the third Marine.
That's funny.
So it was a very experienced squadron, and that checkout program, short and sweet, but building block approach, worked very good for us.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of accidents and deaths, that program suffered some serious. I mean, if anything happened, you're done. I mean, that airplane, on the airplanes, I would say it seemed like you guys had a higher than average than the fleet, say, in a foreign airplane.
It depended somewhat how you measured it. If you measured it like per 100,000 flying hours, you're right. But keep in mind, we did in 25 minutes what a normal squadron did in an hour and 15 minutes.
Sure.
So each one of our sorties was like, 1,000 flying hours for us was 3 times as hazardous as 1,000 flying hours for the other people, because most of your accidents are going to occur takeoff, landing, or when you're doing heavy maneuvering in the plane. We did lose Hugh Brown in a MiG-17 crash back in, I think, 79, was it? Mark Postai died in a MiG-23 crash in 82. And then we didn't have anything else significant go wrong until after I left. I wanted to emphasize after I left. In late summer, early fall of 87.
Was that when Bond did the high speed?
Say that again.
Was that when Bond did the high speed? And
Bond wasn't with our unit. He was at a different unit.
Okay. But that was a MiG-23 that had that incident.
Yes.
With the hydromechanical inhibitor switch causing you not to be able to
speed coast down interlock. But yeah.
Crazy.
It was unfortunate. The guy was getting ready to retire. He was a 3-star. I'm sure he was a great pilot, but when you get to that level, you don't fly that much. He wanted to fly the MiG-23 kind of as a retirement present. And, like any airplane, as long as everything goes good, you can probably do that. But if things start going bad, you need to have had more academics and know a little bit more about what's going wrong with the airplane and what you need to do to fix it.
What I found fascinating reading the book was you guys, different guys going on debt to say Somalia and working with the Somali Air Force and flying their airplanes, or going somewhere else and dealing with folks, on the sly. On the sly. I mean, you're almost like a little James Bond secret agent aviators here. You have any good stories?
No, we kind of had like two different. Earl Henderson, who was one of the commanders, and he had the heart condition, so he had to step down.
Mm.
Earl went into a program at Nellis called Special Projects. He ran the thing,
Mm-hmm.
and different groups of us had different jobs, and different people would work with Earl, and they would go different places to do different things. But I still don't, except for some of the things that are in the book, I still don't think we can talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah, all compartmentalized. Yeah, it was kind of funny. I mean, I remember hearing stories about $500 toilet seats back in the day, and it was on the news. It made the news. The Air Force was buying $500 hammers and $500 toilet seats. In reality, what people don't realize is a program like this is not only expensive to operate and run, but it is of vital importance for an aviator to go beak to beak with a real fighter, especially. What were some of the reactions the guys would have when the first time when you were a test guy in the F-16, did you go beak to beak with one of these constant peg airplanes?
Yeah, I was, before I went to the unit, I was the chief of wing weapons and tactics down in the 474th Wing, which was the first operational wing. And within each wing, there's supposed to be four guys in brief: the wing commander, the vice wing commander, the DO, and the chief of wing weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in briefed on the program. I knew some of the guys down there. I worked with them on some things like range sharing and things like that. We had some of our guys in briefed, ready to go on short notice in case some other units couldn't fill their sorties and we could fill in for them. So I was in briefed on the program there, and I flew in the program. It was probably 83 or something. I flew in the program. So I saw it from both sides.
And so, what was your first reaction when you
Well,
actually
the first
came up with
reaction is, you've never seen one in the air before.
right?
You want to take a good look at it. I'm not sure this was totally legal, but we didn't have U.S. markings on them. We had Soviet
Right.
stars on them. They were seeing exactly what they'd see in the air if they, got in the air with one. So there was some sightseeing in it. There was a lot of interest. There was a lot of buck fever that went on the first day or two of flying.
Yeah.
Gail Peck tells the story of the guys joining up on him and their eyes getting bigger. I don't think I ever remember that, but it's obvious that they typically, what we did with them. We didn't fly on Mondays. You have to remember the Nellis ramp was packed. I mean, Red Flag was there, the weapons school was there, the aggressors were there, the 422 test squadron was there. There was the 474th Tactical Fighter Wing was there with 72 airplanes. It was packed, and we had 2 rows of 6 airplanes each. Even with our priority, that was the most we could get.
Mm-hmm.
So we would bring in each week, we would bring in 2 debts, maybe 2 Air Force, maybe an Air Force and a Navy, maybe an Air Force and a Marine, maybe a Navy and a Marine unit, 6 airplanes each, typically about 12 pilots, whatever people they needed to maintain them. The previous debt would leave on Saturday. The new debt would come in on Sunday. We'd give them Sunday to get organized. Monday morning at 9 o'clock, we had a briefing for them. Initially, the 4477 had 2 trailers, and we had the briefing in one of the trailers in this little room that we referred to as the Coliseum. People sitting on desks and things like that. Later on, we were able to get a pretty secure room down at Red Flag, small auditorium, and we could brief in there. And so the first thing we did was we put a non-disclosure agreement in front of them, the standard $10,000 fine, 10 years in jail or both, and told them, if you want to participate in this program, you got to sign this. And trust me, you want to participate in this program. And
Right.
they all signed it. And then we gave them a short thing that says, okay, this is what we do. You're going to be flying against the MiGs this week. And then we gave them a local area briefing, which was a requirement. Let them know where all the emergency airfields and stuff. And one of the things was our airfield was a classified airfield. But we taught, it's a U.S. airfield. Said if you have an airplane problem and your checklist says land as soon as practicable, land at Tonopah. Yeah, we're going to impound your airplane. The sky cops are going to arrest you, but we'll get you home. We'll get maintenance people up there. We'll get it fixed. And somehow, some way, your airplane will magically appear back on your ramp.
Uh-huh.
So, then we took a break, and then MiG-21 guy would come in, and he'd pop his slide in there. And the first slide was him standing in front of a MiG-21 with his name on it. So it kind of gives you some instant credibility. And we gave them about a 50-minute brief on the MiG-21, not an intel brief. Intel told them, what the wingspan was and what its service ceiling was and things like that, what the plane could do. We told them from a pilot's point of view of the things the plane can do, what does it do really well? What do we like to do with it? Why? And of the things it can do, what is things that it just doesn't do well at all and we don't do them and why we don't do them? And we went through some of the engagements and what they were going to see. So we gave them the heads up on this. And then we took another break, and then the MiG-23 guy came in and he did the same thing. So that was Monday. So then Tuesday, if the guy hadn't flown in the program before, the first thing he did was a performance profile. So let's say we had two MiG-21s against two F-15s or 16s or 14s or whatever you want to say. There'd be a tactical intercept into the merge until the merge was over and somebody got a shot. Then it'd be a knock-it-off call. We'd sort out who was going with the one MiG-21 into 76 and who was going with the other MiG-21 to 71. And we'd change freaks. So we'd have our own frequency there. And we'd get the guy, we'd just let him sit on the wing for a minute. We'd show him what it looked like when the flaps came down, because that was kind of important in the MiG-21. He might see them. We'd show him what the speed brakes looked like when they came out. Then we'd do an acceleration demonstration. We'd just sit there and go, burners ready now. And we just let him run out and let us see how his airplane did acceleration-wise compared to that MiG.
That's amazing.
And then we'd drop him back behind us, and we'd show him what our best sustained turn rate was without losing speed. And then we'd wind it up, and we'd show him what the best instantaneous turn rate was. And then, especially in the MiG-21, then we'd jack the nose up about 45 degrees and fly it like a kite at 80 to 90 knots. So he'd see, I really don't want to get this close to this guy. I don't want to get in the phone booth with him.
Yeah, the phone booth. I saw that. Getting into the phone booth.
Yeah, that's a term that's used just mean to get in close.
Right.
Like, for example, if you and another guy were in a phone booth and he had a pistol and you had a rifle, who do you think has the advantage? The guy with the pistol does, because you can't get the rifle up.
Right.
So for planes like that to maneuver really well, really close in, you don't want to do that. So, and that was one of the big learning things with the MiG-21.
Yeah, he brought that up in the book where he talked about it. F-15 has, say, just for example, 350 pounds or something of radar in the nose, and your airplane only has like 80.
We had the lightest nose MiG-21s there were. The MiG-21F, Fishpad C/E, had the Hilark radar in it, which was just disregard that. Had the HIFIX radar in it, and it was a range-only radar. It was very light, so the nose positioning in that thing was as light as you could get it. And that's what we did. When we ran intercepts against them, we would usually use Soviet-type intercept philosophy, lead arounds, crossovers, things like that. But once we got into doing the BFM, the air combat type maneuvering, basic fighter maneuvering, we didn't use Soviet stuff at all. We just did a full up, I'm going to show you what a well-flown MiG-21 that's flown by a well-trained aggressive pilot can do, that knows your airplane and your capabilities. And we told them at the end of the week, even the beginning of the week, if you can beat us, you can beat anybody, because we're going to show you a worst case scenario. We're not going to have any mercy or any pity on you. And so we'd go out and do that, especially typically the first days we'd do BFM. A lot of times they didn't do very well. There were some units that did well, but a lot of the units, the guy was sightseeing and he was just kind of looking at the plane and wasn't flying his best. And when we'd come back into the squadron that night, of course, we had to fly back in either MU-2 Mitsubishis or C-12s, depending on what year you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Some nights it was like a death in the family. I mean, they were down on themselves. They'd lost confidence. They didn't know why they had flown that bad. They were kicking themselves in the butt. And, so we're going through this with them. Yeah, you got too close to the guy. We showed you that. But that's okay. We told them, even though we told them not to get slow with a MiG-21, we also told them, like when I was a little boy, I used to brief this. When I was like 4 or 5 years old, I was looking over the edge of the stove at something my mother was cooking, and I'm reaching my hand up there, and she said, "Ted, don't touch that. You'll get burned."
Yeah.
A smart person would have learned, but not me. I had to know what it felt like to get burned, so I touched the stove once. I never did it again. So we told them, says, you're not supposed to get slow with a MiG-21. And I tell them that story. I said, how many of you had to reach up and touch the stove? And most of them would raise their hand. I said, if you feel the need to touch the stove, if you feel the need to see what it's like to scissors with a MiG-21, this is the time and this is the place. Do it now. We can show you what it's like. And most of them did it. And they still felt that they could beat the plane at that, and usually they couldn't. But by their second BFM mission, they'd learned that and they were doing much better. And by Friday, maybe when they'd flown their third mission and we'd come back into squadron Friday night, I mean, they're laughing and giggling and high-fiving each other and kind of halfway making fun of us as we're coming back in, and they're drinking our beer that we bought for them. And so that was good. That made us feel good because that was our job. It got their confidence back, and they were just basically saying to themselves and their buddies, I hope I get to see one of these in flight because I'm just going to eat him like a grape.
Kind of like Libya in '81 when the F-14s went against the MiGs over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those guys, if I remember right, reading in the book, those guys had been exposed to the program before.
I don't remember, but it was not at all uncommon as a carrier group was going to sea. The Navy guy, every year we put our schedule together. Mm-hmm. And the Navy and Marine guys would come in with their things. And I typically worked around, when I was the ops officer, I worked around the Navy and Marine guys most, because when a carrier's going to sea, they like to have their workup with that right before they went. And so it was kind of important that they got the sequencing, they got the schedule right before that carrier group was going to leave. And so we'd give them that. We'd fill in with Air Force guys and stuff around that. So a lot of the Navy guys, that's one of the jobs of the Navy guys that were assigned to our squadron, was they were the liaison with the Navy. They scheduled the Navy stuff. They worked with them. They typically would give the brief. When the Navy debts came to town or a Marine debt, the Marine would brief the MiG-21 or the MiG-23 academics to them because he spoke their language.
Let me ask you this. We had the MiG-25 over in Japan where the guy defected. And we also had Blinko. Now, did he come work with you guys and actually help? I mean, CIA should have grabbed those guys and forced them to come, live in a trailer out there with you for the good life. But to help you decipher and work with the switches and switchology maintenance, or
well, first of all, he was a MiG-25 guy, and we didn't have any MiG-25s. We had to give their MiG-25 back to them. But
what about the one down in Cuba? I met that guy. I met that squadron. A friend of mine, George Acosta, was a Harrier pilot who died in a 2v1 in Cherry Point. He just lost his SA and drove his plane into the river. And at his funeral, I met this Cuban, I think it was a MiG-23 or MiG-25 pilot who had taken off and went over the water and landed in Key West. Did a couple laps around the pattern and then just landed. So I'm talking to him and he goes, yes, I left my wife and my child in Cuba, but one day, mark my words, I will go back. And then about a year later, I'm in the squadron, open up USA Today, and there's an article that says Russian MiG defector goes back. And I mean, he took like a 310 from Key West, went over there, landed on the road, grabbed his wife and kids, threw them in there before the Cuban special police could intercept him, and got off and got back to the States. It was kind of a really, really cool deal.
I don't know if I should tell this, but I'll tell you a Belenko story.
Uh-huh.
Um, he came around to some of the fighter bases to talk. And when I was an F4IP down at Homestead, which was 78 to 81, I guess, he came down there and he gave a little talk and things like that. And we got to ask him a bunch of questions. And, one of the questions was, the CIA had gotten him and they'd given him a new identity and some money. And he had driven from like Seattle to Key West and up to Maine and down to San Diego. And they asked him, I said, what impresses you most about the United States? He said, your telephone system. He said, Russia doesn't have Ma Bell. And then one of the guys asked him a little privately later and says, when you go to the bar on Saturday night, he says, what do you tell the chicks? You can't tell them you're a MiG-25 guy. He looked at him, he says, I tell them I am Finnish hockey player. He says, it works great. So if you ever run into a Finnish hockey player at one of the bars, it might be him.
Oh my God, that's funny. That's funny as hell. I wonder, I haven't seen him around. Is he still alive?
I have no idea.
I wonder. I have to look at that. And when did your program cease? In 87?
I left in June of 87 and went down to MacDill for F-16 requal. And by the time I got back to Luke, which was probably September or so, they had decided to close the program down. Happened very fast. Our guy working the program at TAC basically said he was called into the 4-star's office, and the 4-star said, shut it down. And
that sucks.
And that was
I
it.
think that's a great experience for the fighter guys out there.
It shut down basically. It shut down like in February or March of 88. I think their last mission as a squadron was a mass launch red flag mission. Telling other stories, we started flying towards the end of it in all mission employment phases also. The fighter weapon schools would get together and they'd have graduation dates that corresponded for their F4s and F15s and F16s and A10s and F111s, and they'd get B-52s in there and they'd have this mass launch. And this one time especially, we flew in it a couple days, and one day I was in the SOF, and we only had one runway at Tonopah. And like a MiG-21 takes off minimum fuel and lands emergency almost every day. So I went and I talked to the fire department up there, and I said, I'd like to have a fire truck at the approach end of the runway, midfield, and departure end. If we have an airplane that breaks down on the runway, tow it off into the desert to get that runway clear, and we'll worry about it later. And the guy says, well, he says, really, for me to roll fire trucks out, I can't do that unless an emergency's been declared. I said, no problem. I can take care of that. So, okay. So we're up there. We got a bunch of airplanes in the Army area getting ready to go. The first 2 MiG-21s take the runway. I'm the SOF of the tower. I turn to the tower chief and say, ring out the crash phones. I'm declaring an emergency. He said, what for? I said, I'm just declaring it. I don't have to have a reason. He says, okay. So he called out the crash phones. The fire trucks came out. They were sitting there. There was no problem, but we had them there if we needed them. Last airplane lands. I said, terminate the emergency. And the fire trucks went back to their barns. So.
And did you guys end up doing that every flight after? I mean, did they continue that or no?
I think that was the last one that we did while I was there. I don't know what they did after I left.
Because MiG-21 had the fuel bladder problems, and the MiG-23 you had the engine problems. So did you ever dead stick this thing into the Tonopah?
No. I never even really had an engine problem with any of them. The MiG-21's engines from the back, if you were sitting there as a 2-ship and you're number 2 and number 1 lights his burner and rolls, and you're looking at the back of this thing in burner, it doesn't look good. There's hot spots and there's flecks and things like that and everything else. And you're going, that just doesn't look right. But every single one of them ran every time. The MiG-23's burner looked good. That was a good engine. The R-29, the R-29B300, really, really good engines. I wouldn't have minded putting that air model engine in an F-16 and going to fly the thing. It had nice shock diamonds and everything else. It was a good, strong engine. So we did have one airplane that we got from a different country, which was a little different, and it quit, and the guy was able to dead stick that back at Tonopah.
That's amazing feat. Oh, that's the guy that got the DFC.
He got an air medal.
Oh, he got an air medal. I thought there
Yeah.
was another guy that it had, or maybe it was the landing gear had not retracted, or not. Landing gear didn't come down. He couldn't get the gear down.
I think you're talking about something that happened more recently, like 2017. Different unit.
Oh, okay. Uh, secret, no foreign. God. The canopies. That story of the canopy imploding. Did
Jim,
they ever? Yeah. Did they ever figure out how to reverse engineer or make canopies for your birds?
oh yeah, and we did.
Wow.
We had different people that we could go and in brief around the country to do things for us, to make canopies, to make tires, to make brakes, uh, to do higher level engine work. One thing I got to say right here. A lot of people think, boy, this is really a story about operations. These pilots were really brave guys, got in these airplanes, flew these things with switches that they couldn't read that was in the Russian acrylic lettering, and numbers on gauges that were in kilograms per square centimeter. This is really a story of maintenance.
Right. Oh,
Our
amazing.
maintenance guys were simply the best maintenance guys on the planet. I mean, they were high ranking too. Where you go to a normal squadron, F-15, 16, F-4, A-10, whatever, and the crew chief might have been a 2, 3, 4 striper. Our typical crew chiefs were like 7, 6 stripers and stuff. I mean, they were high rank tech sergeants. We might have had a few staff sergeants. Most of them were techs. I think we might even had a master sergeant that was a crew chief. And they loved that. This was their airplane. A lot of times they had built it from parts almost, put a bunch of parts in hangars where they drug them out of ditches or this or that or something else, and basically told there'd be an experienced crew chief and a new guy, and they'd show him a picture of a MiG-21, and they'd say, when you get done with this, we want that pile of parts to look like this picture, and get to it. And so they basically their answer was simple. When you said, how did you get these things to make them flyable? They said, well, we took them apart, we fixed what was broke, and then we put them back together.
Right.
But every day they provided us with good, safe, flyable airplanes. And our part of it really was pretty easy. All we had to do was go fly the things.
Fly it, not get into a flat spin and kill yourself.
That was frowned upon for sure. But
I mean, it was a national asset, considered a national asset.
yeah,
Just an incredible deal. Those guys did that theme did come out in the book. The maintainers were gods when it came to the restoration. The Malaysians, when they got, or Indonesia, when they got the MiGs, they were in a ditch, some of them up to water, up to canopy. And those guys were able to clean them all out, fix it all up, and get it going. Now, is that a testament not only to theirs, but to the construction of the MiG?
well, the MiGs are pretty basic type things.
Right.
Russians have a saying that quantity has a quality all its own. So they built a very basic airframe, and they built a lot of them. And it was a strong airplane. The MiG-21 was a really, really good, fun flying little sports car. Easy to fly, easy to control, easy to land. So yeah, it was basic, and it was meant to operate under steer conditions. They could operate them off of dirt strips.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was, I don't know if this next story I'm going to tell you is true or not, but this is what I heard. I heard that one of them was actually submerged in a river, and that the organization that I won't name, which was responsible for getting us things like this, they went to the Navy and they got some divers, and they got a C-5, and the country of origin told them, they said, you cannot come in before dark, and you have to be gone before the sun comes up in the morning.
Holy crap.
They flew this C-5 in there after dark, at the nearest airfield. They had flatbed trucks, and they went to the river, and the Navy divers jumped in, and they had welding stuff, and they cut off the wings, and they towed the thing out of there and put them on flatbed trucks, throw them in the back of the C-5, and flew it out before the sun came up.
Jeez.
And that was one of the airplanes that ended up on the hangar floor with a picture and a new guy saying, "Make that look like this."
Even though they cut the wings off the thing, they were able to.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the things was it was a compartmentalized program, which meant you only needed to know what you needed to know to do your job. So we as pilots didn't need to know where they came from, how they appeared, or anything else. And oddly enough, when I think back on it now, we didn't ask that many questions. Every once in a while, if the weather's bad, we were sitting around or something, somebody would bring it up where they might have come from or tell a story like the one I just told you, which I don't know if it was true or not, but it sounded like a good story. So I thought I'd tell it. But, we didn't really know for sure where any of these things came from, and we didn't care. Our job was to fly them. We went up there in the morning, we flew them, we came back in the evening, we debriefed, we went home, we did it again the next day.
Let me ask you this. Did you trust the ejection seats? Seemed to be a large issue with that.
Well, it depends what you mean by trust. Everybody had to make their own decision on that, particularly the early model MiG-21s. So, for example, my priority, if you've ever looked at the desert from the air, the desert looks pretty smooth, and dry lake beds look smooth as glass, right? Well, they're not. So my priority was certainly if I could get it back and land it on the runway, that was my first choice.
Right.
If I couldn't find a runway, I would land it on a dry lake bed. Even though as those dry lake beds dry out, they crack and everything unless you drag them to smooth them out. So it's not all that smooth, but it's fairly smooth. So
but these airplanes also designed to be able to land at austere airfields.
Yeah, but let me continue with this. So the dry lake bed, even though it had some ruts and stuff in it, that was my second choice. My third choice was the ejection seat. And my fourth choice was landing in the desert. Because although the desert from 30,000 feet looks pretty smooth, when you get down there, it is not. There is ravines and arroyos and bumps and hills, and chances of landing it in the desert and coming out unscathed, fairly small. But I figured if I couldn't make a runway, couldn't make a lake bed, hopefully the ejection seat would work. And if the ejection seat didn't fire, then my only choice was the desert.
God, that's crazy. Did you ever?
Well, the seat in the MiG-23 was obviously a better seat. It was a high-speed seat, and it had a thing that wrapped around your head to try to keep your head from being jostled around when you ejected. The numbers that we had at the time, keeping in mind we didn't have Russian manuals,
right?
So we just had sort of what we had, what we put together. The numbers that we had said 1/3 of the people got out basically uninjured. 1/3 of the people got out with pretty severe injuries, and 1/3 were killed. So those aren't great odds. Later on, I've learned from, I've communicated with a couple guys. One guy who's was an East German MiG-23 pilot, and another guy who actually was an SA-5 guy from Moscow, but had grown up across the street from a MiG-23 base, and his hobby was MiG-23. They both said the numbers on the ejection seat were better if it was in the envelope. The problem with it was a lot of the ejections were out of the envelope, so that's what drug their numbers down.
Well, you guys were also hampered by satellite coverage of Russians bringing satellites over the base. So that also hampered, I mean, in the air, I guess they couldn't really see the airplanes in the air, but they could see it if it was sitting on the ramp. So you had to land and get it in undercover, right?
Yeah, every Friday we got a message from Cheyenne Mountain giving us the projected satellite overflights for the next week.
Wow.
Every night we got a message giving us an update for the next day. And we had covers that were 17 minutes. The high resolution time frame was really only 3 minutes. But we had 7-minute buffer either side of that for lower resolution photographs. So we would have 17-minute closures. and we would either make it so we could fly through that, or more times than not, we were on the ground with everything in the hangar during those time frames. And as soon as that was over, we pulled planes out of the hangar. Occasionally, the guy was already in the cockpit ready to go. They just towed him out. He started the engines and went.
Jeez, man, that's amazing. And towards the end, you guys had the stealth 117s at the other end of the airfield, right?
Yep.
So you guys are pretty busy airfield for a little uncontrolled place, right?
Well, no, we flew during the day.
Oh, that's right. They flew at night.
They flew at night. We flew an 8-turn-8 on our MiG-21s, a 3-turn-3 on our MiG-23s, and a 3-turn-3 on T-38s. We had 5 T-38s that we flew as chase planes and to go cross country in and just mess around in, basically.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. I do remember one of the pranks in the book. The guy was bagging on the nighttime guys, saying, "So are our booms bother you?" And they're like, "Nah, man, they don't bother us at all." you guys come down from 30,000 feet and do the sonic boom right over their barracks or something, didn't you?
We called it the boom arrival. It's MiG-21 makes a pretty good boom. Yeah. T-38 makes almost nothing. Yeah. I've had that thing going 45 degrees, nose down, the fastest, full afterburner. Fastest I could get is 1.15 Mach. And I'd just do loops, like 4 or 5 of them, just seeing if how bad I could boom the bass. And I come back down and say, how was it? Well, we heard some pops, but not much. But the MiG-23, on the other hand, if you had that with the wings at 72 degrees at 15,000 feet, which is about 10,000 AGL, doing 1.5 Mach, it could slow, these big hangar doors from World War II, yeah. They would sway very slightly with that sonic boom, and those drop-down styrofoam ceilings, could bam! And a layer of styrofoam would come down over the desks and the floors, and we'd have to go in and sweep it up. And
did they ever come back and tell you, all right, you got to stop this stuff, man?
They let us know they didn't care for it a whole lot.
We'll talk about some of these pictures you sent. That now, who probably somebody in the T-38 chase plane, because
yeah, typically when we would take pictures, which we didn't do very often, we'd brief the Thunderbird photographer, and we'd bring him up and throw him in the back seat, and he'd go out and take some pictures for us. There was one picture that I really wish would have survived. We took off 3 MiG-23s one morning, right at first light. And we brought them around overhead the field with the T-38 taking a picture of us with the field in the background, wings at 72 degrees, afterburners in, so you can see the shock diamonds from the afterburners, 50 feet behind the planes. And that was a great picture. Now, one of the other guys in the squadron remembers that the Thunderbird photographer had forgotten his glasses, and so it was a little out of focus, but I didn't remember that. But unfortunately, when we closed down, they arranged to keep some stuff that they took to the Pentagon and was kept in an office in the test and evaluation section.
Right.
All the rest of the stuff they shredded. 2 guys stayed up there for a week after we left, and they just went through filing cabinet after filing cabinet, shredded everything. So the Pentagon had some stuff for historical purposes. But on 9/11/2001, the fire destroyed everything. So
nothing
what
left.
You see pretty much is what has survived.
And it looks like this guy, the gear's just about to come down or something.
Looks like he's getting, rolling out of his pitch to downwind or getting ready to turn final or something like that.
How was the visibility in these things?
Not great. In the MiG-21, you could only see back to about 45 degrees off your wing line. There was a flap actuator type thing, and that's what we'd show guys. He could see back that far and not much further. The MiG-23 was kind of hard because it had that ejection seat thing I told you about. So if you just went and turned your head, you just ran into that. You have to lean forward, turn around.
Oh, that's
but
tough.
The MiG-23 also had a periscope up top. And a lot of people laughed at that, but I didn't laugh at it. None of the guys I knew that flew it laughed at it. It was good optics. You could see all the way down your smoke trail and actually maybe 10 degrees below your horizontal stabilizers.
Really?
If he was outside of 2 miles, all he was a dot, although you could see him out to 5 or 6 miles with the periscope. If he was
Wow.
between 3,000 and 12,000 feet, you could tell within about 1,000 feet how far back he was. And if he was inside of 3,000 feet, although not many guys got that close because you were accelerating away, you could tell within 200, 300 feet how far back he was.
Was that located in the canopy itself?
In the canopy itself. The canopy came down. It was on the outside of the canopy. And good optics. I liked it.
So reading in the book, right in the center, in between the attitude and the airspeed, is that white stripe.
Yep.
And
so what do you think that's for?
Well, that was to recover out of a spin.
Yeah, when a loss of control. You took a stick and you pushed it to the white line.
Wow, to drop the nose. Nice.
Yeah. Now, that's a pretty normal thing to do in any airplane that's out of control. You want to reduce the angle of attack. You want to get the nose down and let the airspeed start building. But it was only the Soviet planes that had that white line in them. And I don't know. The MiG-23's got something there white just to the left of the radar scope, but I don't think it's a white line. I think they'd gotten out of that by that time.
I wondered about that. It's a big airplane.
Not all that big. I forget exactly what it weighed, but I think it was around F-16 weight. Around like 18,000 pounds empty. It had in it, an air model had 5,400 liters of fuel. A ground model had 5,200 liters. And I think that corresponded to around 9,400 and 9,200 pounds or something.
Right.
Interesting thing about their fuel gauge. The maintenance guys filled the things up with fuel, and then they'd come up the ladder, reach in the cockpit over you, and there was a knob on the fuel gauge that you turned the needle to whatever the fuel load was. 5,400 liters, 5,200 liters. And then what drove the needle down was a fuel used sensor. It censored the amount of fuel that was coming out of the feed tank, and it subtracted that from the needle, and that's what drove the needle down.
So really, how accurate was that?
If you didn't like what the needle said, you could change it. You could, make it say whatever you wanted. It wasn't going to change what fuel you had. But then there was the one backup. There's a float valve in the number one fuel feed tank. And it came on at 500 liters for the MiG-21 and 600 liters for the MiG-23. So whenever that came on, it didn't matter what the needle read. That's what you had.
And so was that bingo? I mean, like absolute bingo, or you're screwed?
No, you're not screwed, because we were very close to our base. But our bingos typically were just a little bit above that. We were looking to land before that light came on.
Well, there's the picture of the periscope right above the cockpit that you're talking about. You can see the ejection seat has the side panels for the head.
Yep.
Boy, that is just beefy looking landing gear.
Yep.
Tough.
The problem with it is it's close together, So close together gear don't work real well in crosswinds. And the MiG-23 wasn't good in a crosswind. Sometimes it shoulder rolled. You'd come in and land it, and it'd start doing one of these as it's going down the runway type thing. MiG-21 had a much wider landing gear in it. It was great in a crosswind.
Let's see.
Yeah, you see how far that landing gear is out? It retracts inboard.
Right. So this is over
mid-wing.
This is over in Iraq at Al Asad, and it was right outside of base op. So a two-seater. So what is that? A MiG-21 UB. And then how about that big boy that was sitting there?
I don't know what that. It almost looks like a MiG-25, but
actually,
it's got intakes like a MiG-25. That's a MiG-21 UB again.
I should have stolen the canopy off that thing right at home.
I think it's a MiG-20. It could be a Foxhound instead of a Foxbat, but I think it's a Foxbat.
Well, these are all pictures I took over in Iraq where Saddam had drugged these things and buried them.
Yeah.
And I was out one day just cruising around the junkyard. I like to look for stuff. I found an old Texan T6. And I found this engine sitting there. So I went to maintenance, mouths, and I said, "Hey guys, I need to borrow a couple Marines with a blowtorch." "What do you need that for, sir?" I said, "We're going to go out there and cut the dang first stage of this engine off and bring it back and get the blades." And I got my titanium blade. I've only got one left. I think my dad has one. I have to ask him if I gave him one of these things. But yeah, these are nice. Good piece. There was a couple questions I think some people had. Jim Grider, he's an old F4 guy, one of my instructors over at my airline. What squadron Homestead went through an 80, 81, 307th Stingers?
I was there 78 to 81. I was in the 306th.
Close, man. You guys probably drank some beer somewhere together, chewed the same airspace.
Probably at the Homestead AFB bar, or maybe down at Alabama Jack's.
Billy Morton, did they have Russian pilots work with them? If so, how did they perform?
No Russian pilots.
Yeah, you guys were all on your own, right? Alone and unafraid. Hiram, we're using Spear and I think talking about the phone booth.
Oh.
Ted, how was it going back to the CAF after a CP tour?
Demoralizing. we had done some really good stuff. We knew more about MiGs than anyone in the Air Force. So we wrote our own manuals. We did our own stuff. We made our own decisions to ground airplanes. Let me see how much I can say about this. That airplane that we got, which was not a MiG-21, but the engine quit in it. Mm-hmm. We had several of them. So we grounded, and it was brand new. I mean, had like 35 hours on it, and the engine quits. So like every engine, the engine rotates this way, and there's a shaft that goes down out of it, either called a tower shaft or a vertical shaft, whatever you want to call it. And it attaches to an accessory drive gearbox, which is mounted on the side of the engine. And the accessory drive gearbox drives all the things normally driven by it. There's the oil pump, usually, and a hydraulic pump, and maybe the engine tachometer and whatever. And then there's the fuel pump.
Right.
So there was a metallurgical problem in the gear that changed it from going this way with the engine to driving down. And we had one of those engine people I talked to, which was at another location, and they showed me what it was. I was the ops officer at the time. And they said, we got two choices. They said, there's a thing called infant mortality, where some things just break early. Mm-hmm. And if they don't break early, they're good. And or we can ground those airplanes and reverse engineer them. It'll be 18 months before you get them back in the air again. So they had already gone. They had people at our place inspecting engines, and they said, we don't see that in any of your engines that you got up there. So I went back to Tonopah, and we usually had a squadron meeting at Tonopah from 5 or 10 minutes maybe before we'd leave in the afternoons to go back to Nellis. And I explained what this guy said to me, and I went around the table and I said, what are you guys' feelings? Are you comfortable flying these airplanes under that condition or not? Mm-hmm. And to a man, they all said, one, these airplanes had better ejection seats in them than the early model MiG-21s. And given the fact that, they've been inspected and everything and they look good, they all said, we're good to fly them. So we needed the 4-star approval to fly them, but, I recommended to my boss, the squadron commander was out of the country. He always seemed to be out of the country when the shit hit the fan. So I had the squadron for a little bit. I recommended to actually the squadron commander's boss, who was the director of adversary tactics at Nellis, to recommend to the wing commander, to recommend to the TAC DO, to recommend to the TAC commander that we return to flight unrestricted. One of the other generals wanted to return us to flight, but only within 15 miles of the field and 15,000 feet altitude, because our glide ratio was about 1,000 feet per mile. He said, so if the engine quits, you could dead stick it. And I said, I don't really like that. I said, first of all, on takeoff and landing, you're out of the flame out landing envelope. And even if the engine does quit right overhead the field at 15,000 feet, it's not a gimme. There is risk involved in it.
Sure.
And so the TAC commander listened to this general, and then he listened to the TAC DO, and the TAC DO basically said, I agree with the squadron operations officer who recommends unrestricted return to flight. and the 4-star returned us to flight unrestricted. So we made a lot of these decisions. We had a lot of authority within our own unit. We didn't have people breathing down our necks, at least not for a while. And so when I went back to the regular Air Force and I took a look around, I mean, I was doing as an ops officer there an awful lot more than a squadron commander was doing in an operational unit, and it kind of was discouraging.
Well, how about the engines? You know, you were talking about that, the reliability of the Russian-built engines. How, I mean, when you talk about what's going on over in Ukraine or Ukrainians versus the Russians, knowing what you know about their equipment, how would you rate them against a squadron of F-16s or F-15s?
Who, the Russians or the Ukrainians?
Russians. Let's just do Putin's guys.
If you're talking about the Su-27 family, which goes up to 30s, 33, I think, is a Navy plane, 34 is a bomber, 35 is another air superiority fighter. It is like what we call fourth generation fighter or fourth generation plus fighter. F-15s and 16s are fourth generation fighters. F-22s and 35s are fifth generation fighters. That Su is, if the people are trained well in it, that 27 up to 35 is an extremely maneuverable airplane. It comes down a lot to the aggressiveness of the pilot on board the thing. So I would say against an F-15 and 16, the Su family would be pretty comparable if the pilots were comparably trained.
What about the reliability of the engines and the mechanics of the aircraft based off what you see Russians having built in the past? I mean, do you think the reliability of the engines are there?
Yeah, the MiG-20, I'm not sure if this was the MiG-21 or the MiG-17 or 19, but some of the early model MiG engines were like 250-hour overhaul, 500-hour throwaway. We didn't throw any of them away. And we ran those engines harder than the Russians ran them. I mean, we were in burner half of our flight. And our chief of maintenance was concerned about that. And he had a right to be concerned about it, but they kept running. That MiG-23 engine is a great engine. I mean, I never had any problem with that. Johnny Mann did. One of them shut down on him, but that was a throttle rigging problem, I think. And that thing lit up again on him on final anyway. But that MiG-23 engine is a good engine. Now, take a look at that Su-27/35 up to 35 that does that Cobra maneuver. You've seen that on TV?
Yeah.
Where they're I can't do this. They're coming in, they're just all of a sudden very high angle of attack and they're slowing way down.
Yeah.
And people say, wow, that's a very interesting maneuver, high angle of attack. He still got it under control and stuff. Think about what that engine's doing. That engine is sucking air that's coming down that intake at a 90-degree angle, sometimes a 120-degree angle, and it is not compressor stalling. Okay, that is amazing to me. Yeah. So the Soviet engine technology that we were aware of was very good. We did some reverse engineering on their hydromechanical fuel controls that were actually a little bit better than ours. And if I remember this correctly, they had a coating on their turbine blades on the MiG-23. And it was important that those turbine blades held on because their fuel cells didn't have bladders in them. And if it threw a blade, it would go through the fuel cell, which obviously caused a big fuel leak, which caused a big fire, which, nobody likes to have.
Right.
So, it was important that not happen. So we took a look at their coating on these things and we said, we think their coating sucks. We're going to take this off and put our own coating on. And we did it. And ours didn't work near as well as theirs did. I think we almost lost a plane because of it.
Oh, God.
So a lot of this.
Did you do the coating on all of them or just one test one?
I think we just did the one plane before they realized it wasn't good. And they went back to the Soviet stuff, left that stuff on there. But the Soviets are slow in some things. And sometimes their integration isn't all that good. And sometimes their metallurgy isn't all that good. Their rivets kind of are rough and add a little drag to it. But I found their engines to be very good, very reliable. I would not discount them.
That's amazing. Jim said Ted took the 562nd from George to red flag in '87. Were you at Tennebaugh then?
No, I left June. I think it was June 12th of '87.
God, you guys were just right there. Fly out of Groom Lake. Yeah.
Officially, I got to say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Stephanie here is an avid collector. I know her personally. She's an avid collector of aviation stuff. And as a matter of fact, probably has one of the greatest collections of aviation related materials all around. And did you fly with Soviet Russian flight gear, or did you adapt familiar U.S. gear to the aircraft? How did the Russian gear compare?
Some of each. It was certainly the Russian ejection seats and the Russian harnesses, which stayed in the airplane. We flew the airplane stock just the way we got them, with 5 exceptions. We put a U.S. altimeter that read in feet as opposed to meters, a U.S. airspeed indicator that read in knots as opposed to clicks. We had a U.S. UHF radio in them, a U.S. IFF transponder in them, and then there was this package of adapters so that our oxygen, comm, and G suit could hook up to their stuff. So that's how.
And so the G suits actually hooked into their G suit stuff.
Yeah, we had an adapter on their hose. Their G suit hose was the exact same place our G suit hose was. So there was just an adapter our maintenance guys put in there so that our G suit would just plug right in, just like it did at an F4, an F-15, or an F-16. And
God, that's amazing. I was reading Bucko had, he was talking about the Marine Corps, yesterday's technology for tomorrow's Marine Corps, and the Air Force excessive use 3 months. If the G suit didn't stay inflated overnight, they would throw it away. And he was running around with parachute bags and grabbing stuff and taking them back to his buddies at the squadron, going, "Hey, Christmas time, here you go."
I don't doubt it. We had one guy, a sergeant in our squadron named Pritchard. I forget his first name. And he was in charge of bedding the detachments down and everything when they'd come in. And typically, like red flag and everything else, we'd put them up at a place downtown, a hotel or something, which certainly was not top tier. And a lot of them were pretty run down. Air Force unit we'd put in there, and the Air Force guys would complain. The Navy guys, we'd put them in there, and the Navy guys were okay with it. And the Marine guys, when we put them in there, they thought they died and gone to heaven.
You mean I get a remote for my TV?
And if I'm not mistaken, George Tullis one time, when there was a little bit of problem with housing, he said, no problem. And he put his debt of Marines out in the desert in tents. And they did not complain.
Oh, they complained. They just didn't complain to you.
Not to us.
I was loving some of the stories of the pranks that the guys were playing with. What was it? Your first taxi. Everything was your first, right? Oh, your first taxi. You got to put $20 into the jar.
It was a round of beer. First time snowball, round of beer. First time taxiing, round of beer. First time starting engines, a round of beer. First time riding the Key, which was a 727 that the 117 guy was using. The first time that was a round of beer. Says, is this the first time you've ever done this? He said, no. Says, is this the first time you've lied to me today? Yeah, that's a round of beer. Finally, you just have to tell him, I'm not buying any more damn beer.
Well, what was the deal about the eggs in the drink? Bucko was there. Some guys had walked up to him, were giving him a hard time, and they.
Yeah, I got no firsthand experience in that. I've heard about it where, they dared him to drink it or something. And
yeah, they cracked the egg in a drink.
He drank it. One of the other guys drank it and threw up, and Lenny drank his puke or something.
Yeah, the two Air Force guys puked
in
their glasses.
I wasn't there.
And then he grabbed it and he drank theirs. Oh, I gotta love a Marine, man. You gotta love a Marine. Stephanie asked helmet and mask, because she does collect helmets and masks.
Our helmet and our mask, our oxygen. We had one of our adapters on it that you push the button, you clicked it in, and your oxygen hooked up to the bottom, and then your comm hooked up to it. We had that on their harness, so We used our helmets.
Wow, that's cool.
I've got my helmet sitting in my family room.
Now, when you went back to the fleet, were you able to? You were never able to even talk about this stuff, were you?
No, but what we did was there was ways we could impart our knowledge to it. So if we were out there talking to a guy at BFM1 and we were
Mm,
telling about a MiG-21, we would say, I've heard that a MiG-21 can do this, or I
right.
read in some manual where a MiG-21 can do that. And I've heard that if you did that, you're going to be a dumb shit, you know. But so there were ways we could impart what we knew to them without actually saying it.
Well, did you ever get to dogfight a real Meg? Not one of ours, but
No.
no. Ah, well, I was in Boise, Idaho, and there's some billionaire dude out there that has a MiG-29 that he's flying around because I landed and I'm taxiing to the gate and I did what you were talking about. Like, holy crap, that's a MiG-29. And it just taxied on by just like nobody's business. Um, he's probably the only guy in the US with a MiG-29. I wonder how the insurance lets him. Uh,
Yeah, I've seen and heard of two guys with MiG-23s, both of them two-seaters, that they apparently fly at air shows and maybe charge money for rides in them and things like that. But I mean, that's just, and there was one guy had an F-104 and he contracted like with the test pilot school out of Edwards, and they fly a couple rides in that every class or something. But
well,
that's an expensive proposition. I mean, even if the airplane doesn't cost that much, the fuel and the maintenance, particularly on engine overhauls and
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, I was at an air show down just last weekend, 2 weekends ago, um, in Burnett, Texas, and it's the largest small air show around. And they had a MiG-17 out there flying around doing high-speed passes and all that stuff. I mean, it was a phenomenal looking airplane, but I bet that cost an arm and a leg to fly as well. And you retired in '91,
Mm-hmm.
so did you, as an F4 guy, ever remember a pilot named Dick Lawyer, Richard Lawyer, by chance?
No.
Because I got a chance. You were talking about the contract guys flying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He was flying out in the Mojave Desert, and they would fly out to Hawaii, Barking Sands. They would do missile tests for the government in these F4s, and
Mm-hmm.
I think they had F-86s as well, two-seat F-86s there at Tricor. And so I'm sitting there flying with him. He took me up to 53,000 feet, and as we're trucking along, we're on opposite headings. We got up above 50,000 feet, and then we shot these drones. The drones went up to 80, and then came down on Aegis class cruiser. And then the two F4s, we turned away from each other, and they shot missiles up at the drones. So as we're sitting there cruising, we're at 53,000 feet, and I remember he's just kind of sitting there, and it was really hard to breathe with the forced oxygen. And he was just looking up at the sky like this, and it was black. I mean, it was pretty black, and I remember him saying, "Hey, Taco, if we have an engine failure or something happens, don't worry about ejecting because we'll be dead." Wait, I'm a C-130 guy. What are you talking about? And he goes, above 50,000 feet, your blood boils. You really need a pressure suit. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
think
how much?
it's actually about 57,000 feet where the boiling point of fluid with viscosity of blood is 98.6 degrees. But the Air Force weren't supposed to go above 50,000 without a pressure suit.
Yeah,
So
but I'm sitting there thinking, hey, man, how much longer are we going to be up here?
yeah.
I'm a C-130 guy, but it turns out later on, I find out Dick Lawyer was a secret astronaut. He had gotten picked up to be, they had the Gemini program. All the guys had trained alongside the Gemini astronauts, and it was a secret Air Force program that was going to launch a Gemini capsule with two of these secret astronauts with big camera pods in them. And they could take pictures over Russia or wherever they wanted, photographs. But then Lockheed or whoever it was came up and said, hey, we designed this big satellite that could take better pictures, poop the film out. It goes in, the C-130 out in Hawaii could snag it with the little pincers. But so he was a secret astronaut, and he never told anybody. And it wasn't until after they were clearing out some bunkers in Cape Canaveral and they found his spacesuits. And they called him up and they said, "Hey, um, uh, Colonel Lawyer, we found your spacesuits here in Cape Canaveral. Could you tell us about the program?" He's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Well, we got your records. We know it's you." And I still don't know what you're talking about. "Do you have a fax machine or something we could send a declassification of the program?" And they did. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I was part of that program." But he never told his wife or anybody. It was amazing.
It's hard to get programs declassified.
Yeah. How did they break down yours? I mean, what an incredible experience.
Ours was a little different in that one of our squadron commanders, after he retired, became Air Force TE, Test and Evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
So he owned the office that had this stuff from Constant Peg. And when it was destroyed, see, one of the things you have to have in order to declassify a program is things for the people to do that, to look at, to say, okay, this is declassified. But there was nothing for him to look at, basically, so they couldn't declassify it. So apparently he and the Secretary of the Air Force, a administrative assistant who has under it the people that declassify stuff, worked a deal based on this program where they would declassify the program.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2006, Secretary of Air Force Public Affairs published an article saying Elite Air Force Aggressor Unit MiG Squadron declassified. So that would appear to do it. But then when we went back to try to get, to look to see if there was anything at maybe any other locations that might still exist, no one would talk to us because they said the program was never officially declassified. All the I's weren't dotted, all the T's weren't crossed, because no one was able to look at stuff to say this is declassified. So we've done things like we sent in a bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests that came back with nothing, and a mandatory declassification review that came back initially with nothing. And we've recently submitted another mandatory declassification review, and we'll see if that produces anything or not. But it is a big bureaucracy once you get to that level.
Right. Well, that's amazing. I am so glad that Enrique hooked us up. The idea of talking to a MiG pilot. I mean, how many guys in the military would give their left foot to go fly one of those, and have a little fun in them and get the experience that you had? Um, totally, totally insane when you think about it as an aviator.
It became just a job for us. We went to work every day, and those were our airplanes. And like I said, this is really a story about, actually the word maintenance isn't a good word, because maintenance means to keep something in its existing condition.
Right.
And if all our guys would have done was that, we would have never flown an airplane.
Innovators.
So they took them apart, they fixed what was broke, they put them back together, they knew them inside and out. I had one day out of Mig-23. I know you're trying to wrap this up, Taco.
No, it's fine.
And I was out. We had two hangars, and ops was in one, and maintenance was in the other. And then the other Mig-23s were on one side, Mig-21s were in the other, and above them there was some maintenance offices. And I start this Mig-23 engine, and it just doesn't feel like it's running right. It feels like it's misfiring. It's not accelerating right, things like that. And I'm kind of doing it. And the crew chief and I are talking, and we said, well, let's shut it down and restart it and see what happens. So I shut it down and go to restart it, and about the same thing's happening. And what I didn't realize at first was the second story up there, one of the officers was our main engine guy, a guy named Dennis Schumacher. And Dennis had heard the first engine start, and he didn't like it. So he comes down, and he's at the front of the hangar with his head looking around the corner as I do the second engine start. And I look over and I see him, and he just looks at me and he goes, "Shut it down." They didn't have to wait to be called. They knew these things by sound. I think he had the thing fixed in a couple hours. But the maintenance guys knew those airplanes. They were great people. I really feel honored to be able to serve with those maintenance guys and the logistics guys, if you want to call it logistics, and the whole program. There were just a whole bunch of really top-notch people. The guys
was
that sent us from the
who,
Navy and Marine Corps were all top notch, and the Air Force guys, Air Force pilots were too. It was a real honor and privilege to be able to serve in that unit.
the definitely, most definitely. There was one guy they mentioned in the book, the mad guy or whatever, the guy that ran up and he was just wearing a
Weird Harold.
Weird Harold. He went up and kissed the admiral, wearing nothing but like a belt and boots or something.
That was the early days when things were a little looser. That was before the 117s got there.
Weird, weird Harold. I don't think family broadcast I can publish half the stuff or say half the stuff he did, but he sounded like a Klinger character. Like
he was one of those guys that was a little bit weird on one side of his brain, but the other side of his brain was maintenance, and he knew his stuff like everybody else.
Yeah, brilliant guy. Oh my God, that was a great story. Do you have anything else? Like, all right, you're out there in La La Land. Let's see, where was that map? Did you happen to see anything like a UFO anytime that you could talk about, or no?
You know something? The combination of the Air Force and American Airlines. I've flown day and night. I've flown summer, winter, spring, and fall. I've flown in, the United States and Mexico and Europe and the Pacific, and I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, I never have either. I always go back and I introduce myself to the PAX in first class there. And I go, "Do you guys have any pilot questions?" And normally they never do. And they're just kind of looking at me. And I go, the first question people normally ask me is, "Have I ever seen a UFO?" I go, "No, I've never seen one." And the second question, "How come we can't fly through a line of thunderstorms?" And I go, "Well, that's easy because that's where UFOs refuel inside of the thunderstorm and they get the kinetic energy out of there. And if you hit a UFO, put a staple in your health record.
That's as good a story as any. Works for me."
Yeah, what was that guy's name? Freddie Fox. You remember that guy?
I knew Freddie Fox.
I heard. All right, for those that don't know, Freddie Fox used to. He would fly to Hawaii or whatever, or fly to Japan, and he would pull out a little string, and if it had a weight on it, like a washer, and if it went one direction over his food, he wouldn't eat it. If it went the other direction, he would eat it. He would get on shows and talk about UFOs and how he got abducted, and he would be taking a nap, obviously taking a nap, and he'd wake up and he'd go, "You see that cloud? I was over, there's a UFO in that cloud. I was over there." And everybody was like, Freddie Fox. He was legendary.
Yeah,
but
I never saw him do the thing with the string. I flew with him a couple of times, DC-10, LA to New York and back. Typically, going one way was talking about UFOs, and going the other way was talking about federal income taxes.
Yes. Okay, so he didn't pay taxes. He had a little book. He was part of that group or whatever, militia that didn't pay taxes. And somebody told me when he retired out in Hawaii, the IRS came after him. And they ended up settling his case for pennies on the dollar. So let's just say he owed a lot of money. He settled it for pennies on the dollar. And then they were at the retirement and they said something to him like, "Freddie, that's amazing." He goes, "Yeah, man, all that UFO shit paid off."
Yeah, I don't know.
Because they were like, "He's crazy."
The last I'd heard of him, he'd gone to court and everything, and his cases were still pending. I'd heard that he retired down around San Antonio and bought a farm, and I heard the IRS had confiscated his land. So,
oh, really?
That was second or third hand. I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, I wonder. Let's see. She asked, "Did the fox bat that Victor defected in Japan make it to group?" No, they returned it. Jim's absolutely right.
Yeah,
they tore it apart.
They sent people out there to do exploitation on it. I know one of the guys that did that. I knew one of the guys was there when he landed. And Malenko was there at the end of the runway, just short of a highway, out on his wing, waving his pistol around, yelling, "I defect." They exploited it. The radar was a very strong radar in that thing and had a lot of coolant in it, sort of like glycol. And they said when Malenko landed, the airplane had more radar coolant in it than it did fuel. So they did as fast an exploitation as they could in a short amount of time. But the Soviets obviously knew where it was, and it was Soviet property, and they demanded it back, and we gave it back to them.
After we studied it.
I think we had some delays in there. You know, there were some problems, some paperwork required and stuff to give us some time, but we gave it back.
So when did you get hired onto the airlines? Back in 91, 92?
91.
91. So you didn't get axed in
No, I was a DC-10 flight engineer in LA in 95-ish or 94, 95 when they started furloughing. I was pretty senior guy, so I never even really went to where I didn't hold a line. I think they furloughed about 1,500 guys. So I was pretty good shape then.
And when did you retire from the airlines?
2013.
Oh, nice. You lucky dog. I don't wish to be older, but when it starts doing the cycles, that's when I'm like, you know, I'd like to grow a beard, sit back, relax, play with my tanks. That's about it. Sometimes I don't wish to be that retirement ready, but I am ready to retire, I think.
It's retirement's a great life. You won't regret it.
Yeah, you're busier now than you were.
It's very nice after a month or two to wake up in the morning and go, I wonder if my alarm clock still works.
Well, I've got a little present that I'm going to send to you when we get off. We'll talk and just hang with me for a minute. I'll say goodbye and we'll wrap this up.
Okay.
Anything else you want to pass? Any
no,
save
I
round?
guess, what am I seeing? We're on here for an hour 40 already. I could probably talk for another 2 or 3 hours, but I think we've hit the high points.
Well, I tell you what, I'll bring you back on and we can get down into the weeds and get some more great little vignettes and stories and stuff like that. We'll schedule it about 6 months out. How about that?
You better remember what I talked about, or I'll probably tell the same stories over and over again.
That's all right, man. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Hey, Ted, you have a great night. Hang on, and I'll be right back. All right?
Okay. Thanks, Taco.
Hey, you bet. Hey, folks, I hope you enjoyed this special edition Tall Tales with Taco with Ted Drake. Fantastic, awesome stories. I'm a cargo guy. I mean, I've only got a flight in a fighter once in a F4, and I got to land on the Lexington in the back of a A4 many moons ago. So for me to talk to somebody that actually flew the devil's airplanes, enemy's airplanes, is very exciting. And it's not something that you get to hear about every day. As a top secret program, as I was kind of alluding to, the $500 toilet seats and the hammers and all that stuff. Well, that was to go into the operational cost of keeping these very important programs going and also funding the top secret black items, the F-117 stealth fighter and other things like that. But sure do appreciate Ted's time. You guys, if you get a chance, you can get on Amazon. You can buy this book, Red Eagles. I mean, it really does a great job going through acquiring the assets, the different missions. We only talked about Constant Peg. There was Have Donut, have all these weird names for the different programs that they had for captured pieces of equipment or repatriated pieces of equipment that we got from allies and from different people around the world. So very fascinating look into this secret program. Buy it, check it out, and tell me what you think in the comments down below. Until next time, you guys have a great night. Really appreciate you being here with us. And adios, hasta luego, auf Wiedersehen, tschüss, shesheni, au revoir, domo arigato gozaimasu, tando shinde kudasai, ciao, arrivederci. And thank you, Michael Costanza. I am going to do Jet Fighter. Say goodbye. Hold on a second. Here we go. I love that one. All right, but we're really going to close with this. So you guys have a great night, and we'll see you next time. Next Tuesday. Hoorah, Semper Fi.